The morning sun filtered through the bridal suite windows as Simone Washington stood before the full-length mirror, her fingers trembling slightly as she smoothed the delicate lace of her grandmother's wedding dress. The vintage 1950s gown had been carefully preserved for decades, waiting for this moment. At 28, Simone had dreamed of this day since she was a little girl listening to her grandmother's stories about love, perseverance, and dignity in the face of adversity. "You look absolutely radiant, sweetheart," her mother whispered, adjusting the cathedral veil that had also belonged to Grandma Rose. Simone's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she thought about how proud her grandmother would have been to see her wearing the dress that had witnessed so much history, so much hope. The Oakwood Country Club buzzed with activity as guests began arriving for what everyone expected to be a beautiful celebration. Simone had worked 3 jobs for 2 years to afford this venue, determined to give herself and Michael the wedding of their dreams. She'd served tables at night, tutored students on weekends, and worked as a receptionist during the day, all while maintaining her modest lifestyle in a small apartment downtown. To her, the sacrifice was worth it to see the joy on her family's faces as they experienced such elegance. Michael stood at the altar, his face beaming with pride as he watched his bride-to-be prepare for their moment. They'd met in college, 2 kids from working-class families who'd found love in late-night study sessions and dreams of building something beautiful together. He worked as a junior analyst at Cromwell Financial, grateful for the opportunity but still climbing his way up the corporate ladder. Among the guests filing into their seats was Patricia Ashford, a woman who commanded attention wherever she went, though not always for the right reasons. At 45, she wore her wealth like armor, from her perfectly coiffed blonde hair to her designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was the wife of Michael's boss and had insisted on attending when she learned about the wedding, claiming it would be delightfully interesting to see how those people celebrated such occasions. Patricia surveyed the venue with barely concealed disdain, her lips pursed as she took in the modest floral arrangements and simple elegance that Simone had carefully planned within her budget. "How charming," she murmured to her companion, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I suppose it's refreshing to see such economical choices in wedding planning." As guests took their seats, Patricia made sure to comment on everything from the quaint centerpieces to the interesting musical selections being played by the string quartet. She treated the waitstaff with casual dismissiveness, snapping her fingers when she wanted attention and barely acknowledging their thank yous when they served her champagne. "I do hope Michael knows what he's getting himself into," Patricia whispered conspiratorially to another guest. "Mixed marriages can be so challenging. Different backgrounds, different expectations, different social circles." Her words carried the weight of generations of prejudice wrapped in the veneer of polite concern. The ceremony itself was breathtaking. Simone glided down the aisle like a vision, her grandmother's dress catching the light as she moved with natural grace and dignity. Her father, a mechanic who had worked overtime for months to help pay for the wedding, walked beside her with tears of pride streaming down his cheeks. The love between Simone and Michael was palpable, their vows bringing genuine tears to the eyes of most guests. Even Patricia had to admit the ceremony was beautiful, though she quickly found ways to diminish it. "Well, they certainly know how to put on a show," she commented during the recessional, "though I do wonder how long such passionate unions typically last." The reception began with the usual festivities. Simone and Michael's first dance was magical, their joy infectious as they swayed to their chosen song while surrounded by family and friends who had supported them through their journey. The couple moved through the crowd afterward, graciously thanking each guest for sharing their special day. It was during this time that Patricia began to escalate her behavior. She deliberately positioned herself near the buffet line, cutting in front of Simone's elderly relatives while pretending not to see them. When Simone's great-aunt Rose politely mentioned she had been waiting, Patricia turned with mock surprise. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize there was a line," she said with exaggerated concern before immediately turning back to the serving staff. "I'll have the salmon, and please make sure it's not overcooked. I can't abide poorly prepared fish." As the evening progressed, Patricia's comments became more pointed and deliberate. She loudly discussed her own daughter's recent wedding at the most exclusive venue in the state, making sure everyone within earshot understood the comparison she was drawing. Of course, Stephanie's reception had ice sculptures and a 10-piece orchestra, but then again, her husband's family has been in society for generations. Some traditions simply can't be acquired overnight. The breaking point came when Patricia approached Simone during a quiet moment between dances. Simone was standing near the head table, taking a breath and simply absorbing the happiness around her. The red wine in Patricia's glass seemed to move in slow motion as she stumbled forward, the deep burgundy liquid arcing through the air before splashing across the pristine white lace of Grandma Rose's wedding dress. The room fell silent. The band stopped playing. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Every eye turned to witness the horror unfolding as the wine soaked into the delicate fabric that held decades of family history and love. "Oh my goodness!" Patricia exclaimed, her hand flying to her mouth in theatrical shock. "I'm so terribly sorry. These shoes are just impossible to walk in. I hope that vintage dress wasn't too expensive to clean." The pause before vintage was deliberate, loaded with condescension and barely concealed satisfaction. Simone stood frozen, staring down at the spreading stain that was destroying the most precious thing she owned. This wasn't just a dress. It was her connection to her grandmother, her family's history, her heritage. The tears she'd been fighting all day finally threatened to spill over as she felt the weight of Patricia's cruelty settle over the entire celebration. Michael appeared at her side instantly, his face flushed with anger as he confronted Patricia. "That was no accident, and you know it," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "You owe my wife an apology." Patricia's expression shifted to one of wounded innocence. "I certainly will not be spoken to in such a manner by someone in your position, young man. Accidents happen, and I've already apologized. Perhaps if people weren't so attached to old things, these situations wouldn't be quite so dramatic." The crowd murmured uncomfortably. Some guests pulled out their phones, sensing that something significant was happening. Simone's mother rushed forward with napkins and stain remover, desperately trying to minimize the damage, while tears flowed freely down her cheeks. The beautiful celebration was transforming into a nightmare before everyone's eyes. But then something extraordinary happened. Simone took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and looked directly at Patricia with a composure that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. When she spoke, her voice was clear, strong, and filled with a dignity that commanded attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, addressing the entire room, "sometimes life presents us with unexpected challenges that test our character in ways we never imagined." She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. "My grandmother, who wore this dress on her own wedding day in 1952, taught me many things. She taught me about love, about perseverance, and most importantly, about how we choose to respond when others try to diminish our light." With graceful movements, Simone began to carefully remove her grandmother's stained dress, revealing underneath a stunning backup gown that took everyone's breath away. The second dress was a modern masterpiece, elegant and sophisticated, that transformed her from lovely bride to breathtaking vision. "Grandma Rose always told me to have a plan for everything, including dealing with people who mistake kindness for weakness," Simone continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "She also taught me that the best response to cruelty is not retaliation, but demonstrating who you truly are when tested." The room watched in stunned silence as Simone walked to the head table and retrieved her purse. She pulled out a checkbook and with deliberate care wrote out a check. When she finished, she handed it to the venue manager who had appeared at her side. "I'm making a donation of $25,000 to the Oakwood Country Club Scholarship Fund for Underprivileged Youth," she announced. "Because even in moments of darkness, we can choose to create light for others." The room erupted in surprised applause, but Patricia's voice cut through the noise with sharp disbelief. "How generous," she said, her tone dripping with skepticism. "I'm sure that's quite the stretch for your budget, dear." Perhaps you should save your money for more practical things like proper stain removal. It was then that fate intervened in the form of an older gentleman in an expensive suit who had been sitting quietly in the back of the room. He approached Patricia with urgent steps, his face grave with concern. Patricia recognized him immediately as her own family's attorney, Henderson Blackwell, one of the most respected legal minds in the city. "Mrs. Ashford," he whispered urgently, "I need to speak with you immediately. Do you realize who you've just insulted?" Patricia's confident smirk began to falter as she saw the genuine alarm in Blackwell's eyes. "What are you talking about, Henderson?" "It's just some girl who married above her station." Blackwell glanced toward Simone, who was graciously accepting congratulations from other guests, then back to Patricia. "That girl is Simone Washington, as in the Washington Foundation, as in the granddaughter of Theodore Washington, who built a $500 million empire from nothing, as in the sole heiress to one of the largest charitable foundations in the country." The color drained from Patricia's face as the implications hit her like a physical blow. The Washington Foundation was legendary in business circles, known for its strategic investments and massive charitable contributions. More importantly, she suddenly remembered that her husband's company had submitted a grant application to the foundation just last month, hoping for funding that could make or break their expansion plans. That's impossible," Patricia stammered. "She works regular jobs. She lives in a modest apartment. She had to save money for this wedding." "Because she chooses to," Blackwell replied grimly. "Theodore Washington raised his granddaughter to understand the value of work, of earning her own way. She could buy this entire country club without blinking, but she chooses to live modestly and earn her own success. And you just publicly humiliated one of the most powerful women in the state." As if summoned by their conversation, the venue manager approached Patricia with a formal envelope. "Mrs. Ashford, I've been asked to deliver this to you personally." With trembling hands, Patricia opened the envelope to find a letter from the country club's board of directors. Her membership application, which had been pending for months, had been reconsidered and ultimately declined. The letter was polite but firm, citing concerns about conduct and compatibility with club values. Meanwhile, Simone continued to move through the room with natural grace, accepting genuine apologies from guests who were horrified by what they had witnessed. She showed no trace of vindictiveness or anger, only the quiet dignity that had characterized her throughout the entire ordeal. It was then that she approached Patricia directly, her movements calm and purposeful. Patricia found herself face to face with the woman she had tried to humiliate, but now the power dynamic had shifted completely. "Mrs. Ashford," Simone said quietly, reaching into her purse to retrieve a business card, "I believe you were curious about my background." She handed Patricia the elegant card, which read simply, "Simone Washington, President, Washington Foundation." Patricia stared at the card as if it might bite her, the full weight of her actions finally settling over her like a suffocating blanket. Around them, other guests had begun to distance themselves, their conversations taking on hushed, urgent tones as word of Simone's true identity spread through the room. "I understand your husband's company recently applied for one of our small business development grants," Simone continued conversationally. "It was an impressive application, quite ambitious plans for expansion into emerging markets." Patricia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish gasping for air. She wanted to apologize, to somehow undo the damage she had caused, but the words wouldn't come. The magnitude of her mistake was becoming clearer by the moment. Michael's boss, Roger Cromwell, appeared suddenly at Patricia's side, his face red with embarrassment and barely controlled panic. "Mrs. Washington," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "please allow me to apologize for any behavior that may have been inappropriate this evening. Mrs. Ashford's actions in no way represent the values of our company or our family." Simone nodded graciously. "I appreciate that, Mr. Cromwell. Michael speaks very highly of working for your firm." She paused, her eyes moving between Roger and Patricia. "I'm sure tonight has been educational for everyone involved." As the evening wound down, Patricia found herself increasingly isolated. Guests who had previously sought her attention now avoided her entirely. Her attempts to engage others in conversation were met with polite but distant responses. The social currency she had spent years accumulating was evaporating before her eyes. The wedding photographer, who had been discreetly capturing the entire drama, approached Simone with a knowing smile. "Mrs. Washington, I believe you'll want copies of tonight's photos, all of them." The images he had captured told a complete story: Patricia's deliberate cruelty, Simone's dignified response, and Patricia's ultimate humiliation when the truth was revealed. As the last guest began to leave, Simone stood with Michael, still radiant despite the evening's challenges. The stained wedding dress had been carefully preserved. Rather than being a symbol of victimization, it would become a reminder of resilience and grace under pressure. "Are you okay?" Michael asked, his arm around his wife's waist. Simone smiled, genuinely content despite everything that had happened. "I'm perfect," she replied. "Tonight showed me exactly who I married and exactly who we are as a couple. We faced the worst kind of behavior with dignity and came out stronger." Patricia, meanwhile, slipped out of the venue early, her head down and her earlier confidence completely shattered. The drive home was silent, filled with the growing realization that her actions would have consequences far beyond this single evening. Her husband's business, their social standing, their carefully constructed world, all of it was now at risk because of her inability to see past her own prejudices. In the days that followed, the story of that night would spread through social circles like wildfire. The Washington Foundation's next newsletter would announce a significant donation to establish a new community center, with a special program dedicated to teaching conflict resolution and cultural understanding. The stained wedding dress would be framed and displayed in the Foundation's headquarters, not as a trophy of victory over an enemy, but as a testament to the power of grace in the face of hatred. Simone Washington had proven that true power isn't about flaunting wealth or status. It's about maintaining dignity when others try to tear you down. She had shown that the most devastating response to cruelty isn't revenge, but simply being who you are when tested. Patricia had expected to humiliate a woman she saw as beneath her, but instead revealed herself to be exactly the kind of person the world could do without. The moral of this story isn't just about hidden wealth or secret identities. It's about the fundamental truth that our character is revealed not in moments of comfort and ease, but in how we respond when others try to diminish our humanity. Simone Washington understood what her grandmother had tried to teach her all those years ago. The most powerful thing you can do in the face of hatred is refuse to let it change who you are. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in fighting back, it's in showing the world exactly who you are when someone tries to make you smaller. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has a way of ensuring that those who choose cruelty over kindness face exactly the consequences they deserve.